Title: A Woman's 20-Year Vigil Appended by a Hidden Truth. For 20 years, an elderly woman named Eleanor lived in total devotion to her sick husband, caring for him with unconditional love, believing that nothing could shake the story they had built together. But in a single day, a truth kept silent for so long comes to light, and everything she knew crumbles. The secret he hid all those years hits her like a devastating blow, shattering her world into pieces. The afternoon was warm, and the sound of a gentle breeze flowed through the cracks of the slightly open window. Eleanor, with her gray hair and trembling hands from age, sat by her husband Marcus's bedside. For 18 years, he had been under her care since the day his illness began to steal his vitality, slowly extinguishing the strength of the man she loved so dearly. Now, all that remained of him were his eyes, which occasionally sparkled with a lost memory from the past. But as rare as those moments of clarity were, they were what kept Eleanor alive and perseverant. "I promised you," she murmured, holding Marcus's cold and fragile hand. "I said I would be by your side until the end." Marcus didn't respond, his eyes remained vacant, staring at the ceiling as if searching for something beyond Eleanor's comprehension. But she believed that somewhere inside him, he knew she was there, keeping the promise of eternal love. Eleanor was about to get up to prepare afternoon tea when she heard the sound of the doorbell, a rare visitor at her house. She thought as she slowly walked to the door, feeling the weight of her 70 years with every step. When she opened it, a young mailman, unfamiliar to her, handed her an envelope. "Good afternoon, ma'am, this is for Mrs. Eleanor Rossi, correct?" He smiled politely, not really expecting a response. "Yes, that's me." "Thank you," Eleanor replied, somewhat suspicious. She hardly ever received mail. Who would send something in these times? She closed the door and, with the envelope in hand, returned to the armchair by Marcus's bed. With her glasses perched on her nose, she carefully tore open the envelope and began to read. With every word that appeared before her eyes, a knot formed in her throat. The paper trembled in her hands. "We inform you that financial support for Mr. Marcus Rossi's treatment will be discontinued in 2 weeks due to new government funding cuts for patients in chronic conditions." Eleanor stopped reading. The letters began to blur as tears filled her eyes. No, this couldn't be happening. After everything they had been through, after years of struggle, sacrifice, and sleepless nights, how could the government just take away the only support that allowed Marcus to stay alive? How could they be so cruel? She clutched the letter tightly as if she could tear the words from the paper and reverse them, but she knew there was no going back. Despair began to overwhelm her. She looked at Marcus, still motionless, still lost in that silent and shadowy world. "Marcus," she whispered as if he could hear her, "what am I going to do? How will I take care of you?" For a moment, she felt as if she were sinking into a bottomless abyss. She thought of all the people she could ask for help, but the reality was cruel, she was alone. The few friends she had left were as old as she was, and distant relatives didn't care. In fact, Marcus's family hadn't shown any interest in how he was doing for years. Eleanor stood up abruptly and went to the window, looking out at the deserted street. Her body trembled, but not from exhaustion, it was from anger, from powerlessness. She needed to do something, she couldn't let them take everything from her, not after so long. "I will fight," she thought. "For you, Marcus, I will fight." Suddenly, a thought crossed her mind, a last resort. She could try reaching out to the government, maybe the media, or perhaps someone willing to help them. But she knew that for that, she would have to set her pride aside, and she would for Marcus, she would do anything. She returned to the bed and gently caressed her husband's face while silent tears streamed down hers. He didn't respond, but deep down, she believed that on some level, he felt it, he knew she wouldn't give up on him. "We will make it, Marcus. I promise you." The next morning, Eleanor woke up earlier than usual. Her bones ached from the effort, but she ignored the pain, there was so much to be done. As she prepared coffee, her thoughts raced. Where to begin? Eleanor had been a determined woman her whole life, but it had been many years since she had to fight for something so big. Marcus had been the provider, the pillar of the family, until illness brought him to the state he was in now. Now, she was his only protector. The first thing that came to mind was to call the insurance company. Maybe there was some way to extend the treatment, some exception or special benefit that hadn't been mentioned. But deep down, Eleanor knew the chances were slim. These companies didn't usually care about cases like theirs, and she had no influence or connections that could help her. She picked up the phone with trembling fingers and dialed the number of the healthcare company that had been providing treatment for Marcus. The wait felt endless as the hold music played repeatedly, making the silence in the house even more unbearable. When she was finally connected, an impersonal and mechanical voice came through the line. "Vital assistance, good morning. How can I help you?" "Good morning, this is Eleanor Rossi." Her voice came out weaker than she expected. "I received a letter stating that my husband Marcus Rossi's treatment will be discontinued. I would like to know if anything can be done, any exceptions, an alternative plan. He needs this treatment, we have nowhere else to turn." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Eleanor felt her heart race. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance. "Mrs. Rossi, I'm sorry," the operator replied, her voice devoid of any emotion, "but our policy is clear. Patients who reach their coverage limit and show no substantial improvement in their clinical condition lose their entitlement to subsidies. I understand the situation is difficult, but there are no exceptions." Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment, trying to contain the growing frustration. "He's stable at least, doesn't that count as a form of progress?" Her voice now carried a hint of desperation. "I don't care what needs to be done, we can pay in small installments, work more, do whatever it takes." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Rossi, unfortunately, we cannot change the decision. If you wish, I can refer you to a support department to seek more information about alternative services." "No, thank you," Eleanor murmured, hanging up before she could hear more empty apologies. She sat at the table, her gaze lost in the cooling cup of coffee. The operator's words spun in her mind, no exceptions, was that it? After all the years of care and dedication, everything would be decided by a simple company policy. But deep inside, something began to change, a spark of anger ignited, slowly growing in her weary mind. It couldn't be the end, not like this. If no one cared about Marcus, she cared, and she wouldn't rest until she secured what he needed. That's when an idea began to take shape. Perhaps it was time to appeal to something greater, a powerful name. She remembered an old acquaintance of Marcus's, someone he had worked with in his youth, a man who, if her memory served her right, had become a renowned lawyer. The name escaped her momentarily, but she knew where to find him. Eleanor rushed to the bookshelf in the living room and pulled out an old photo album. Among the yellowed pages and frozen smiles in time, she found what she was looking for, a photo of Marcus at a gathering next to a tall man with dark hair and glasses. The name finally came to her, Vincent Luca. Vincent had been one of Marcus's best friends from work and was now one of the most respected lawyers in the city. Perhaps he could help them. It was a risky idea since they hadn't been in touch for years, but there was no other way. Without wasting time, Eleanor picked up the phone again and, with trembling hands, searched for Vincent's contact number. After several frustrating attempts, she finally got the number for his office. With her heart racing, she dialed and waited. "Luca Law Office, how can I help you?" A formal and cold female voice came through the line. "I would like to speak with Mr. Vincent Luca, please. Tell him it's Eleanor Rossi, Marcus Rossi's wife. He will remember." "I'll check, Mrs. Rossi. One moment, please." Silence fell again as Eleanor twisted her hands, anxious. Her mind was filled with doubts. What if he didn't remember them? What if help didn't come? Then the line was filled again by the secretary's voice. "Mr. Luca can see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Would you like to come to the office or prefer a call?" Eleanor let out a sigh of relief. "I will be there in person," she replied with a newfound determination in her voice. The next morning, Eleanor dressed with a seriousness she hadn't felt in a long time. She chose a simple yet elegant dress and styled her gray hair in a tight bun. The mirror reflected the strong woman she needed to be at that moment, despite the worry lines etched on her face. Before leaving, she placed a gentle kiss on Marcus's forehead, who remained peacefully asleep. He didn't need to know about the meeting, not yet. The journey to Vincent Luca's office felt longer than it really was. The city was bustling with cars and people coming and going in all directions, oblivious to Eleanor's internal struggle. Each step felt heavy as if she were carrying years of fatigue, but the thought that Vincent might have a solution kept her steady. When she arrived at the imposing building in the city center, Eleanor took a deep breath before entering. The reception was cold, decorated with marble and steel, an environment that felt far removed from any human emotion. A young, well-dressed secretary greeted her with a polite smile. "Mrs. Rossi," the woman said, rising from her desk. "Mr. Luca is already waiting for you. Please follow me." Eleanor nodded and followed the young woman through the immaculate hallways to a large wooden door. Her heart raced, and for a moment, she feared that Vincent wouldn't recognize her or, worse, wouldn't be willing to help. Upon entering the office, she was greeted by a tall man, now with gray hair but still carrying the same confident demeanor she remembered from old photos. Vincent stood up from his chair with a gentle smile. "Eleanor Rossi," he exclaimed, crossing the room to greet her. "It's a pleasure to see you after so many years, despite the circumstances." Eleanor felt the weight of her anxiety lift slightly at the sight of him remembering her. Vincent guided her to a chair and sat down across from her, his expression genuinely interested. "How is Marcus?" The question hit Eleanor unexpectedly. She had always been resilient, but hearing that question brought forth all the burdens of her journey. Tears filled her eyes, which she promptly tried to hold back. "He's stable," she replied, her voice trembling, "but the last few years have been tough, very tough." Vincent nodded, folding his hands on the table. "I imagine it's been quite a challenge. I'm very sorry for what you're going through, and I understand you didn't come here just to reminisce. How can I help you?" Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to find the right words to explain the situation, but the urgency of her plea ended up overshadowing her attempt to be formal. "They're cutting off his treatment, Vincent," she said quickly, as if saying it aloud made everything more real. "The hospital, the insurance company, they say there's nothing more they can do, that he's exceeded the limits of the plan. But I can't leave him without treatment. I can't. I need your help." Vincent listened attentively without interrupting. When Eleanor finished speaking, he sat in silence for a moment, processing the information. "I understand the gravity of the situation," he said finally. "Unfortunately, insurance companies have cruel clauses. Legally, they protect themselves with contracts that are difficult to contest, but that doesn't mean there's no hope. Eleanor felt a glimmer of hope upon hearing that there is a possibility, a chance to contest this decision. We will need to file a formal lawsuit against the insurance company. This could take time and be expensive. I'll be frank with you, Eleanor, it won't be easy. But with the right contacts and the right pressure, we can get them to reconsider. The word expensive echoed in Eleanor's mind. Her savings were practically depleted from Marcus's treatment, but she couldn't back down now. I don't care about the time, Vincent. I don't care about the money. I just need him to keep receiving treatment, she said with a firmness that even surprised her. I'll do whatever it takes. I can sell the house, ask anyone for help. Just tell me where to start. Vincent smiled, admiring the strength he still saw in her. You won't need to sell your house, Eleanor. I'll take the case pro bono, he said with a slight nod. Marcus was a great friend of mine, and I won't let him go through this alone. But I need you to be prepared, this won't be a quick victory. Eleanor felt an immense weight lift off her shoulders. The tears she had been holding back began to fall silently, but this time, they were tears of relief. Thank you, Vincent, she murmured, her voice choked. You have no idea how much this means to me, to us. Let's get started right away. Vincent said, grabbing a file of documents. I'll need all the papers you have regarding the treatment, the contracts with the insurance company, and any medical records you can provide. The more information we have, the better our chances of pressuring them. Eleanor nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. I'll gather everything and bring it today, she replied, rising with a determined spirit. Vincent accompanied her to the door, giving her one last smile. Don't worry, Eleanor. We're in this together. Eleanor walked home with a mix of relief and worry. Although Vincent had offered his help, the road ahead still felt uncertain. She knew the fight against the insurance company would be tough, but for the first time in a long time, she felt there was a real chance for change. Upon entering the house, she found Marcus sitting in the living room chair, his eyes tired but still holding that spark of curiosity that always accompanied him. You took a long time, my love, Marcus's voice was weak but warm. Eleanor smiled softly, moving closer to kiss him on the forehead. I went to see an old friend, she said, trying not to reveal the intensity of the situation. Someone who will help us. Marcus looked at her for a moment, his face marked by time and the fatigue of illness. He sensed there was more behind her simple answer but chose not to press. His pride in always taking care of everything himself kept him from wanting to know details that might worry him. You've always taken care of me, Eleanor. I don't know how to thank the weight of difficult decisions. Now, more than ever, the responsibility rested on her shoulders, but the legal battle with the insurance company seemed to be the last card she could play. You don't have to thank me, dear. I would do it all over again for you, she replied with a firmness that hid her fear. The following days passed in a quiet routine as Eleanor organized all the documentation Vincent had requested. Every paper, every medical report, every detail of Marcus's treatment was carefully reviewed and sorted. During this time, Marcus didn't question what was happening, but Eleanor knew he was aware that something bigger was unfolding behind the scenes. His silence was a way to protect them both from a truth they both feared to face. In Vincent's office, Eleanor handed over the documents, and he immediately began working on the case. There was something reassuring about the seriousness with which he approached the situation, as if every detail mattered. He kept her informed of every step, from notifying the insurance company to the first legal moves. They'll try to ignore us, Vincent said in one of their meetings. The first response will probably be negative, but we can't give up. We'll pressure them. Time passed, and weeks turned into months. The battle with the insurance company was slow, just as Vincent had predicted. What Eleanor didn't expect was the mental fatigue that accompanied the waiting. Between caring for Marcus and keeping hope alive, she felt worn down. The smile she used to encourage her husband became harder to maintain, and her conversations with Vincent were her only relief, the only place where she could show her true concerns. "How are you holding up?" Vincent asked during a late-night call after yet another cold response from the insurance company. Eleanor hesitated. She had always been the fortress, but in that moment, with Vincent's voice on the other end, she felt the barrier crumble. "I'm tired, Vincent," she confessed. "Tired of fighting, tired of seeing Marcus suffer, tired of feeling like there's no end in sight." Vincent's voice was calm and reassuring. "I understand, Eleanor. You're carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, but we are making progress. It may seem slow, but we are moving forward. Trust me, we will succeed." Eleanor closed her eyes, allowing the comfort of Vincent's words to envelop her for a few moments. She needed to believe, there was no other option. That night, Eleanor had difficulty sleeping. Marcus's increasingly fragile face stayed in her mind. She knew he was approaching a point of no return, and it tormented her. The legal battle, though necessary, felt like a race against time. But how much time did Marcus have left? Dawn brought a new day, and Eleanor woke up determined to carry on as she always did. She knew her conversations with Vincent would continue and that each step taken in the legal battle would require more of her patience and strength. But for Marcus, she would do the impossible. In the days that followed, an unexpected surprise changed the course of the story. When she opened the mailbox, Eleanor found a letter from the insurance company. Her heart raced, but she took a deep breath before opening the envelope. As she read the contents, she felt a wave of shock and disbelief. "They're proposing a settlement," Eleanor said, incredulous on the phone with Vincent. "I told you they would yield," Vincent replied, his tone satisfied. "They know they're in a vulnerable position and that the case could gain attention. But, Eleanor, we need to be careful with the terms of this negotiation. We can't accept less than what Marcus needs." The insurance company's proposal was a mix of relief and frustration. While they were willing to negotiate, the initial offer was far below what Eleanor had hoped for. It was an amount that, at best, would cover some of Marcus's most urgent treatments but wouldn't guarantee the continuity of the care he so desperately needed. Vincent reviewed the proposal carefully as Eleanor watched in silence. They were in his office's conference room, and the atmosphere, though professional, carried an emotional weight for Eleanor as if every detail of that document could change the future of her life and Marcus's. "They're testing our patience, Eleanor," Vincent finally broke the silence. "They know you're in a delicate position, emotionally drained, and they think they can take advantage of that." "Is it enough?" Eleanor asked, feeling a knot form in her throat. "I can't take risks with Marcus's health. He doesn't have much time." Vincent looked at her with compassion but also with the determination that made her feel they weren't alone in this fight. "It's not enough, Eleanor. Accepting this would be a mistake. They know that, which is why they offered so little. We need to be strategic. They're trying to force you to concede out of desperation." Eleanor diverted her gaze to the document on the table. The sum looked tempting, especially considering the months of legal battle and the exhaustion of fighting alone. But Vincent's voice echoed in her mind, "They're testing our patience." He was right, the proposal was a trap. "What should we do then?" she asked, searching for the strength she sometimes felt was lacking. "We'll respond with a counterproposal, something they can't ignore," Vincent said, a glint in his eyes that Eleanor interpreted as a sign of hope. "We know they're under pressure, and we'll use that to our advantage." As Vincent worked on the new proposal, Eleanor found herself in an emotional dilemma. Every decision she made felt like it carried the weight of the world. Marcus was getting weaker, and she knew time was running out. Still, she needed to stay strong. The thought of failing at the last moment was unbearable. Back at home, Eleanor found Marcus asleep in the armchair as he often did in recent days. His face, once full of life and vigor, now appeared more fragile with each passing day. She approached carefully, fearing to wake him, and sat beside him, watching the slow and irregular movement of his breathing. "Eleanor," his voice sounded coarse and low. She smiled gently, touching his hand. "I'm here, dear," Eleanor replied. Marcus slowly opened his eyes, focusing on her. "You look worried." Eleanor tried to hide her apprehension, but Marcus had always been good at sensing her feelings, even when she didn't express them openly. "We're almost there, Marcus. They made a proposal, but we're going to fight for something better. Vincent is handling it." Marcus nodded, his tired eyes showing a mix of understanding and resignation. "You've already done so much for me, Eleanor. I don't want you to wear yourself out even more, not for my sake." Eleanor felt her heart tighten. How could he think he was a burden? He was the love of her life, the man who had been by her side every step of the way. They had built a life together, faced ups and downs. Caring for him now wasn't a sacrifice, it was an act of love. "Don't say that," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I would do it all over again 1,000 times if necessary." Marcus smiled, although fatigue kept his smile from being as wide as it used to be. "I know, but you deserve to rest too, Eleanor. I just want you to be okay." She nodded, even though she knew that being okay was a distant concept at that moment. The battle with the insurance company, the daily care of Marcus, the uncertainty about the future, all of it consumed her, but she refused to give up. The following days were marked by back-and-forths between Eleanor and Vincent. The counterproposal was sent, and negotiations intensified. The insurance company, which had once seemed unshakable, began to show signs of weakness. The power dynamic was shifting, and Eleanor felt that, for the first time, they had a real chance at victory. In one of the meetings, Vincent brought news that made Eleanor's heart race. "We received a new response from the insurance company. They are willing to significantly increase the offer, but we still haven't reached the ideal amount." Eleanor looked at Vincent with a mix of hope and apprehension. "How much longer will this take?" Vincent sighed, understanding the urgency of the situation. "We can't predict exactly, but I believe we're close to an agreement. If we keep pushing, we can secure something that will truly make a difference." Eleanor nodded, feeling the mix of exhaustion and determination that had accompanied her for months. There was no turning back, they were too close to give up now. "I'm going to trust you, Vincent, but please don't let this take longer than necessary. Marcus can't wait much longer." Vincent looked at her with the same seriousness as always but with a touch of humanity that comforted her. "I know, Eleanor. We're almost there, and when we get there, it will be the victory you and Marcus deserve." The mornings began to grow quieter, and the days shorter. Marcus could no longer get out of bed as easily, and his once bright gaze was now dimmer, more distant. The pain he felt was no longer just physical but emotional, and Eleanor, watching him closely, felt the weight of each passing second. One night, as Eleanor helped him lie down, Marcus grasped her hand with surprising strength. Eleanor, his voice sounded weaker than usual, almost a whisper. She leaned closer, her heart racing, fearing what was to come. Yes, dear, I'm here, she replied, her voice soft but trembling. I know you're doing everything you can. He paused, struggling to keep his eyes open, but we don't have much time. Those words were a devastating blow. Although she knew the gravity of the situation, hearing Marcus admit it was like facing a truth she had been trying to deny. Don't say that, Eleanor tried to respond, her voice choked. Vincent is almost getting a deal. You're going to be okay. Marcus tightened his grip on her hand, and his expression softened for a brief moment. You've always been my strength, Eleanor, but now it's time for you to think of yourself too. He paused, his breath shaky. I don't want you to lose yourself in this battle for me. Eleanor felt tears burning in her eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let them fall. She couldn't weaken now. Marcus was right about the reality they faced, but she wasn't ready to give up, to accept what felt inevitable. I won't lose myself, she said, her voice firm despite the pain she felt. We're in this together, and I will keep fighting for you. Marcus didn't respond immediately, his tired eyes closed for a moment as if he were searching for strength somewhere deep inside himself. I love you, Eleanor. I always have, he sighed, his eyes still closed as a silent tear rolled down his face. But you need to be ready when the time comes. Eleanor watched him fall asleep, her chest heavy with sadness and despair. Marcus's words echoed in her mind like a persistent shadow, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might be losing the battle. In the following days, Vincent's visits became more frequent. He always brought updates, small advances in the negotiations but nothing definitive. The tension was palpable, and every piece of news he brought seemed to come too late to offer any real comfort. They raised the offer again, Vincent said one afternoon, reviewing documents at the coffee table. We're very close, Eleanor, but they're still hesitating to cover the full amount. Eleanor watched Marcus lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, his eyes closed as if he were just resting. But she knew the time he had awake was becoming increasingly rare. Vincent, I need this to end soon. Marcus doesn't have much time left. If they keep delaying, it could be too late. Vincent sighed, taking off his glasses and rubbing his temples, exhausted from weeks of negotiations and deadlocks. I understand, Eleanor. I swear I'm doing my best. He paused, looking at her seriously. We can try to push them one more time, but it might take a few days. Eleanor shook her head slowly, feeling the helplessness consuming her. The legal battle that had begun as a sign of hope now felt more like a sentence of endless waiting, and Marcus, the love of her life, was becoming increasingly distant. Do whatever it takes, Vincent, but please don't delay any longer, she pleaded. That night, Eleanor sat next to Marcus as she always did. She held his hand, feeling his cold skin, and remembered all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the trips, the challenges they had overcome together. It was almost impossible to believe that the life they had built was about to come to an end. She caressed his face, observing every detail as if she wanted to etch it into her memory forever. We're almost there, Marcus. Just a little longer, she whispered, even though she knew he couldn't hear her. The next morning, as the sun rose on the horizon, Eleanor was awakened by a faint sound. She turned and found Marcus trying to speak, his voice muffled and fragile. Eleanor, he managed to say. She rushed to him, sitting by his side, holding his hand. I'm here, dear. Marcus looked at her with a serenity she hadn't seen in a long time. I'm ready. Eleanor's heart stopped for a moment. She knew what those words meant, but she didn't want to accept it. She couldn't. "No," she began, her voice faltering. "Not now." But Marcus just smiled, a weak smile filled with love. "Don't be afraid, Eleanor. You'll be okay. I promise." The words, while comforting, were a cruel reminder of the impending farewell. Eleanor hugged him tightly, feeling the last warmth radiating from Marcus's body. She could barely hold back her tears as she held Marcus's hand, watching his breathing become slower and weaker with each passing minute. He was at peace, finally, but she wasn't ready to let him go. She couldn't accept that the man she had spent so many years with was about to leave forever. In that moment, she felt the weight of loneliness closing in, threatening to drown her. It was as if the world around her was slowly crumbling, leaving her with only the memories of what once was, a life full of love, laughter, and companionship. Vincent arrived shortly after, his expression worried upon entering the room. He immediately knew something had changed. Eleanor's devastated look, stripped of hope, told him everything he needed to know. "How is he?" Vincent asked, almost fearing the answer. Eleanor couldn't speak right away, the knot in her throat suffocated her, and when she finally found the strength to respond, her voice came out as a whisper. "He is leaving, Vincent." The words sounded unreal to her, as if she were saying something she still couldn't fully accept. Vincent approached Marcus slowly, observing the man he had known since he was young. Marcus had always been strong, determined, someone who would never let anything bring him down. Seeing the fragility of his body and the stillness of his face was a painful blow. "We can't give up yet, Eleanor," he said, trying to sound more confident than he really was. "I'll call the doctors, see what else we can do." Eleanor shook her head, interrupting him. She knew there was nothing more to be done. The doctors had already made it clear that they were at the end of the line, and now it was just a matter of time. Vincent, despite his desire to fight, realized this as he saw the resigned expression on Eleanor's face. "He has made his choice, Vincent." Eleanor's voice was firm despite the evident pain in her words. "And now, I just want to be with him until the last moment." Vincent looked at Marcus again, feeling a tightness in his chest. He wanted to do more, to find a solution, but he felt powerless in the face of the relentless reality of death. He knew that the best thing now was to be present alongside Eleanor, offering all the support he could. "I'll stay here with you, Eleanor," he said gently, moving closer to Eleanor and placing a hand on her shoulder. Eleanor nodded, grateful for the support, but the emptiness she felt in her chest was immeasurable. Sitting beside Marcus, she tenderly stroked his face, murmuring words that only he could understand, promises of eternal love, that he would always live on in her memory, and that even after his departure, she would never forget him. The hours that followed were filled with silent agony. Vincent and Eleanor sat side by side, watching Marcus's slow farewell. The sounds of the house around them seemed distant, muffled by the reality unfolding before them. And then, in the late afternoon, as the sun painted the sky with orange hues, Marcus took his last breath. Eleanor felt his hand suddenly grow lighter, and silence filled the room. She knew, without needing to look, that he had gone. A wave of emotions hit her hard. She wanted to scream, cry, plead with the universe to bring back the man she loved so deeply, but all she could do was hold Marcus's hand for one more moment before finally letting it go. "He's gone," Eleanor said quietly, as if she needed to say it out loud to believe it. Possessions, to her, what truly mattered was the man who was now gone. "He mentioned someone we don't know." Vincent's voice grew tense. Eleanor looked up, confused. "What do you mean?" "He left something to someone else." Vincent nodded, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to say. Yes, Eleanor. Marcus mentioned a person named Olivia in the will. He paused, waiting for the name to mean something to Eleanor, but her face remained expressionless, as if that name were completely unfamiliar. Olivia? Eleanor repeated, trying to recall anyone by that name. I don't know anyone with that name. Who is she? Vincent continued reading, his hands trembling slightly. It says here that Olivia is Marcus's daughter. She has a significant claim to the inheritance. Eleanor felt the ground open beneath her. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. Marcus's daughter? That was impossible. She knew every part of his life, or so she thought. She knew all his secrets. That can't be true, she said, shaking her head in denial. Marcus never mentioned this person. I would have known if he had another daughter. But Vincent was just as shocked as she was. He knew their father was a reserved man, but he never imagined there was something like this hidden away. Eleanor, I'm trying to understand too, he said softly, trying to calm her. But the will is clear. Olivia is named as an heir, which means Marcus kept this a secret. Eleanor recoiled, stunned by the revelation. A mix of sadness and betrayal filled her heart. All those years, all the conversations, all the moments when she believed she knew Marcus completely were now in question. I need to understand, she said, her voice firmer now. Who is this woman, and why didn't Marcus ever tell me about her? Vincent knew he didn't have answers to Eleanor's questions. All he could do was investigate, find out who Olivia was, and what she represented in Marcus's life. I'll look for her, Eleanor, he said, determined. I'll find out everything I can. We need to know the truth. Eleanor nodded, but a deep sadness filled her heart. The revelation about Olivia had shaken her certainties, but more than anything, it made her question her marriage. Could Marcus have hidden something so important all these years, and why? The pain of losing Marcus was now mixed with a new anguish. The search for answers became an almost desperate need for Eleanor. She wanted to confront Marcus's past, discover what he had hidden, and, above all, understand why he had never included her in this secret. The following days were filled with silence. Eleanor barely spoke or ate, the void left by Marcus seemed to grow larger with each passing moment. Vincent, on the other hand, was immersed in research, trying to find out who Olivia was. He had found some leads but nothing concrete. However, one name appeared in a small town miles away. Without thinking twice, he decided to travel there. When Eleanor learned about Vincent's trip, she felt a wave of apprehension. Part of her didn't want to know the truth, she wanted to leave the past buried along with Marcus. But another, stronger part needed answers. Vincent, be careful, she said as her son prepared to leave. We don't know what we'll find. Vincent hugged her, knowing that the coming weeks would be crucial. I'll find out, Eleanor. We'll figure this out together. The days dragged slowly since Vincent left in search of Olivia. Eleanor tried to keep busy, but anxiety consumed every piece of her energy. The revelation about Marcus's supposed daughter had shattered the few certainties she still had. Who was Olivia? How could Marcus have hidden something so significant for so many years? Meanwhile, Vincent drove along isolated roads toward the small town where he had found Olivia's name in some records. The journey was long, but he was determined. He wanted answers, both for his mother and for himself. After hours of travel, Vincent arrived in a quiet town with old houses and tranquil streets. He wasn't sure where to start, but a small clue led him to a local cafe where he heard that a woman named Olivia had lived there years ago. Deciding to follow any lead he could find, Vincent began asking for information. "Olivia," he asked the man behind the counter. "Did she live around here?" The man furrowed his brow, appearing thoughtful. "Ah, yes, Olivia. I haven't heard that name in a while. She lived in a house on the outskirts of town, but if you're looking for her, you might need more than luck." Intrigued by the cryptic response, Vincent pressed on. "What do you mean? Does she still live here?" "No, she left a few years ago," the man replied. "But I heard she's still in the neighboring town. There's a lot of history around that woman, but no one has ever really understood who she was. She was a reserved person, very much like." The man stopped abruptly as if he had said too much. "Like who?" Vincent pressed. The man hesitated but finally replied, "Like her father, Marcus." Vincent froze. The confirmation that Marcus truly knew Olivia left him in shock. Somehow, he had hoped it was all a misunderstanding, a coincidence. But now, the truth was beginning to surface. Vincent thanked the man and left the cafe with newfound determination. If Olivia really was Marcus's daughter, he needed to find her and understand what had happened. But the idea of confronting her made him nervous. How would she react to learning that he was there to question her about a man who, as far as he knew, had kept her existence a secret? After a few hours of searching and more conversations with locals, Vincent finally found Olivia's address. It was a simple house on a narrow, quiet street surrounded by old trees. He took a deep breath before knocking on the door. The sound of the knocks echoed in the afternoon silence. A few minutes later, a woman appeared at the door. She had a weary expression but with features that vaguely resembled Marcus. Her eyes were a deep green, and the silence that followed their encounter was almost palpable. "Are you Olivia?" Vincent asked, trying to hide the tension in his voice. The woman nodded but didn't say anything. "My name is Vincent," he hesitated. "I'm Marcus's son." Olivia's eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms as if she had been expecting something like this to happen eventually. "So, you came because of the will, didn't you?" Vincent nodded. "I came because my mom and I found out about you, and we need to understand. My dad never spoke of you, never told us anything, and now here we are with all these unanswered questions." Olivia took a deep breath and stepped back, opening the door just enough for Vincent to enter. "All right," she said, her voice cold. "I think it's time to tell my side of the story." Vincent entered the house, which was cozy but simple. Books were scattered on the shelves, and a few framed photos hung on the walls, but none of Marcus. He sat on the couch while Olivia took a seat in a chair across from him. "I didn't know you existed until now," Vincent said, trying to start the conversation. "But my dad, he included you in the will, and it devastated my mom. She doesn't understand, and neither do I." Olivia gave a small, ironic smile. "Of course, he never talked about me. He didn't have the courage to deal with the past, not after everything that happened." "What happened?" Vincent asked, eager for answers. Olivia crossed her legs and looked down, thoughtful. "Your mother was always the great love of his life. I never doubted that, but there was a time, long before you two got married, when he had an affair with my mother. I was born from that relationship, but Marcus never knew how to deal with it. He visited my mother occasionally, saw me from afar, but he never truly acknowledged who I was. When your mother got sick, he completely disappeared. I never saw him again." Vincent sat in silence, processing everything he had just heard. The idea of his father, a man he respected and admired, having kept something so significant a secret hit him deeply. "So, he knew about you all along?" he asked. "He did," Olivia replied. "But he was never a part of my life except financially. He sent money, made sure I never needed anything, but affection, presence, he never gave me that." Vincent shook his head, feeling increasingly torn between the image of the father he knew and the reality that was now emerging. "And now?" he asked. "What do you want?" If trying to find the strength to understand it all. "How can someone do this?" Eleanor whispered, almost to herself. "Live a whole life full of secrets, and we never suspected a thing." Vincent held his mother's hand, trying to offer some comfort. "He didn't know how to handle it, Mom. From what Olivia told me, he distanced himself from her when you got sick. Maybe he got lost in his own guilt and never knew how to come back." Eleanor shook her head slowly, as if Vincent's words were both a relief and a burden. "And what does she want now?" "Nothing," Vincent replied. "She doesn't want the money, doesn't want the inheritance. She just wants to move on. She said she never wanted anything from Dad except the truth, but he never gave her that." Eleanor finally allowed herself to cry. It wasn't a cry of despair but of acceptance. Maybe she would never fully understand Marcus's choices, but in that moment, she began to realize that the only way to move forward was to stop searching for all the answers. Some things would simply remain unexplained. "I would like to meet her," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "Not for him, but for her. I want to see who this woman is, who also suffered because of Marcus's secrets." Vincent nodded. "I can arrange that. I'm sure she'd be relieved to meet you too." Days later, Vincent took Eleanor to meet Olivia. The meeting took place in a park, a neutral and peaceful place. When the two women saw each other for the first time, there was a long silence. Eleanor, with her wrinkles from years of care and sadness, and Olivia, with a face marked by the emotional distance she carried. Eleanor was the first to speak. "I'm sorry for what you've been through, Olivia," her voice was soft but firm. "I didn't know about you, and I never would have imagined, but I know we can't change the past. I want you to know that, despite everything, you're part of this story. If you need anything, even just to talk, I'll be here." Olivia looked at Eleanor, surprised by the kindness she found in a woman who could have easily rejected her. Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in many years, she felt a pang of something that could be reconciliation. "I'm sorry too," Olivia said, her voice choked. "I never wanted to be a shadow in your lives. I just wanted to have had a father, but I think the past has left us wounds that can't be healed so easily." Eleanor took a small step toward Olivia and extended her hand, a simple gesture but full of meaning. Olivia looked at the hand for a moment before accepting the touch. That handshake felt like a silent promise that, even with all the weight of pain and secrets, they could, in some way, find a path to move forward. That late afternoon, the two women, each marked by the choices of one man, walked together through the park. The words were few, but the silence between them was comforting. Vincent watched from a distance, knowing that no matter how full of darkness the past was, there was a chance for redemption in the small connections that still remained. Marcus's story would never be completely unraveled, but Eleanor and Olivia decided not to let his secrets destroy them. Instead, they chose a future where, even amid the shadows, there was still room for hope and rebuilding. Vincent, watching the scene, felt a silent relief. He knew the path to healing would be long, but the first step had been taken. In the following months, Olivia began visiting Eleanor frequently, and together, they built a friendship that, in a way, filled the void left by Marcus. Vincent, now with a lighter heart, also grew closer to Olivia, discovering in her a sister he had never imagined having but who became a natural part of his life. In Eleanor's house, the environment that had once been marked by absence was now filled with conversations, laughter, and shared stories. Though the past could not be changed, the future was finally filled with promises. Together, they moved forward, stronger and united, ready to start anew. After all, in the end, love and understanding always find a way to heal even the deepest wounds. So hit that like button if this story touched you, share it with your friends, and let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and resonate with the human spirit. Check out the video on the final screen for another tale that will move you. Remember, it's never too late for new beginnings.